Before Africa was divided by the foreign hands, it was the continent of kingdoms, trade routes, empires, and rich civilizations. But in the late 19th century, a storm was brewing in Europe, one that would forever change Africa's fate. This is the untold story of how an entire continent was stolen without a single battle on its soil. This is the scramble for Africa. The Berlin Conference, Africa was not invited. In 1884, in a cold room in Berlin, Europe's most powerful men gathered to decide the fate of a continent that none of them truly understood. This is the story of betrayal, greed, and the carving of Africa, without a single African in the room. By the late 1800s, Europe was hungry for rubber, gold, ivory, and power. Industrial revolutions demanded resources. Empires craved expansion. Africa, which was vast and rich, became the prize. In November 1884, Germany's Chancellor Otto von Bismarck invited 14 European nations and the United States to Berlin. Their goal avoid the war over Africa by dividing it like slices of a cake. No African leaders were invited, neither kings nor chiefs or elders. The continent's future was redrawn without a single African voice. Borders ignored cultures, languages, and history. Britain claimed the East and Southern Africa. France took the West. Belgium under King Leopold II seized the Congo, not for Belgium, but for himself. The continent was carved like meat on the platter. Leopold called the Congo free state, but it was anything but free. His soldiers cut off hands of workers who didn't meet rubber quotas. 10 million died in one of history's forgotten genocides. African kingdoms sent envoys, wrote letters, pleaded for peace. They were ignored. Their words never made it past European ears. Their lands, cultures, and sovereignties reduced to zones of profit by 90s. Over 90% of Africa was under European rule. Entire civilizations disrupted, languages outlawed, and the cultures demoralized. But the seeds of resistance were already beginning to grow. Africa was not at the table, but it was in the menu. The Berlin Conference set in motion a century of pain, resistance, and survival. This is not where the story ends. To understand Africa today, we must firstly confront the lies told about its past, how Africa resisted colonization. They came with guns, lies, and flags, but Africa did not need quietry. From mountains to coasts, from forests to deserts, resistance blazed across the continent. This is the story of defiance of warriors, kings, queens, and common people who stood against an empire. In Ethiopia, the Emperor Menelik II saw what was coming. He armed his people, trained his army, and read the treaties. They tried to twist. At the Battle of Adwa in 1896, Ethiopian forces crushed the Italian army, and it was a victory that shocked Europe and gave Africa hope. In West Africa, Samurai Ture built a powerful empire through trade and strategy. When the French came, he fought them for over 16 years, using guerrilla tactics and diplomacy. In today's Nigeria, Queen Amina of Zazu had already built walls and commanded armies centuries before colonizers arrived, and when they in 1900, she led the Ashanti Rebellion against British forces, declaring that if the men will not. In the south, Shaka Zulu had long before revolutionized African warfare. His legacy inspired later Zulu uprisings, as well as resistance in Zimbabwe by the Shona and Ndebele, under the leaders like Mbuya Nehanda and Lobengula. Resistance was not only on the battlefields, it was also in poems, prayers, schools, and silent sabotage. Africans refused to be erased. They protected languages, passed down stories, and sang songs of freedom in secret. This was not a silent suffering. It was an unrelenting resistance. They may have lost battles, but they planted seeds. Seeds that will one day grow into liberation movements. The scramble for Africa was not one-sided. The spirit of resistance burned brightly, and it still does. On the other hand, let us discuss about the divide and rule. How Europe controlled Africa. When brutal force was not enough, Europe turned to deception. They called it civilizing, but it was divide and rule, the silent weapon of empire. They separated the tribes, favored some over others, and planted the seeds of distrust that still grows today. Nigeria, the British ruled indirectly, giving power to certain chiefs while weakening others. They labeled some tribes loyal and others hostile. In Rwanda, the Belgians created ID cards based on ethnicity, Hutu, Tutsi, or Twa, driving artificial lines that would later explode into genocide. They made Africans speak foreign languages, swear loyalty to foreign kings, and believe foreign religions. In Congo, they taught their children to hate their own culture and worship their oppressors. They created a world where African identity was punished and Western memory was praised. Schools deleted the heritage, churches demonized the traditions, and the media portrayed Africans as inferior beings, uncivilized and incapable. But beneath the surfaces, resistance began. African sages wrote, questioned, and remembered. Secret schools installed. Truth and riots, poets and parents kept the stories alive. Divide and rule was designed to make Africans forget who they were and to ensure they never united. But they underestimated the power of memory. And that was the economic theft of the continent. They said they came to civilize, but they came to steal. The real reason for the scramble for Africa was greed, gold, rubber, and soil. Europe carved the continent to feed its factories and fill its vaults. In Congo, King Leopold II turned the forests into death camps. For every ton of rubber, thousands of hands were severed. In South Africa, diamonds and gold were dug from the earth by black laborers under brutal conditions, enriching empires abroad, whereby in Ghana cocoa wealth left the country poor while Britain grew fat. Colonial railways were not built for Africans. They were built to move resources from mines to ports. The ports were the lifelines not for Africans, but for Europe's industries. Even taxes were twisted. Africans were forced to pay money, but the only way to earn it was by working in colonial enterprises. This was theft disguised as development. They called it progress, but truly it was robbery. Africans became a rebel without rights, consumers without wealth, and tenants in their own land. There are many untold stories of African heroes of resistance. They erased their names, but we fight to remember them. The scramble for Africa was met not with silence, but with fire. Fire from queens, kings, generals, farmers, and many others. Resistance rose across the continent. In Angola, Queen Nzinga outwitted the Portuguese with diplomacy and defiance. In Ethiopia, The Emperor Menelik II crushed Italy at the Battle of Adwa. This was the high victory that shocked the European throne. In the Zulu kingdom, Shaka's legacy inspired the military genius long after his death. In Algeria, Abd el-Kader led years of guerrilla war against the French. In modern Ghana, Ya Asantewa raised an army when the British stole the Golden Stool, fighting not just for land but for the honor. Samurai Touré, who built Western African Empire, resisted also for 16 years. Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, a Nigerian mother and teacher, challenged also colonial patriarchy and built schools for girls. Africa resisted in battles, in books, in spirit, and even when the guns felt silent, the resistance continued to grow. Through songs, stories, and memories, colonizers had the power, but Africans had the soul, and now the world is starting to listen. But Africa we need is not this we have. We still need power to evaluate, not to speak only. This world needs actions rather than words only. We suffer the most in imaginations rather than in reality. According to Kwame Nkrumah, we must unite. This is Rai Media Rwanda, where the news are given, history is rehearsed, unknown is known, theses are investigated, education is shaped. Subscribe and follow for more.